The wind screamed like something alive ripping across the Wyoming plains, with teeth sharp enough to split timber. Elijah Blackhorse stood knee-deep in snow, one boot braced against a post that wouldn't hold. Ice clung to his beard. His breath came in short, burning gusts. The nail between his fingers slipped twice before he drove it in with a swing that made his shoulder scream. The support beam cracked. Not all the way, not yet, but enough to make the whole walkway shudder beneath him. He froze, hand still on the hammer, eyes locked on the splitting grain in the wood. Overhead, the gray sky churned heavy with something more than snow. The kind of sky that made the bones in his hands ache. The kind that carried old warnings. "Elijah," a voice called from the fence line. He turned, squinting through the veil of snow. Virgil Red Elk sat atop his old sorrel mare wrapped in buffalo hide and judgment. Behind him, two other riders flanked the fence like sentries. "She's splitting," Elijah shouted, gesturing to the cracked post. Virgil raised one hand, not in greeting, just enough to be seen. "So's your mind." Elijah didn't answer. The wind took too much strength just to breathe. He went back to his hammering. The walkway, 28 feet long and just over 3 feet high, snaked across the pasture like a wooden serpent. Elevated planks crisscrossing in a pattern no one but him understood. It had taken him 16 days, hundreds of boards, and every spare cent he could scrounge. Lumber from Dubois, nails from Lander, ropes traded from the traders in Fort Washakie. He hadn't stopped. Couldn't. Not with what was coming. From the top of the ridge, the maze looked absurd, lines of lumber cutting across snow like scars. Some in town had started calling it Blackhorse's Fool Trail, said he was chasing ghosts, that he should have stayed broken after Sarah died. Papa Noah's voice came up the trail, muffled by the wind. 16 years old and already stronger than Elijah had been at 20. The boy was carrying a bundle of pine under one arm, his cheeks red, sweat frozen on his brow. His eyes flicked to the cracked beam. "That's the third one today," he said. Elijah nodded. "Green lumber. She's not used to this kind of cold." Noah looked out over the pasture. Their cattle were dark lumps in the blowing snow, too far to make out clearly. "You really think they'll walk this?" he asked. "When it hits, they won't have a choice," Elijah said. "Snow's gonna come over their backs. Only way they get through is if we lead 'em above it. They're animals, Papa, not people." Elijah didn't speak right away. He tightened the rope around the cracked post, then leaned his weight against it. It held for now. "Animals know death when they smell it," he said finally. "Same as us." Noah stared at the post. "We used the last of the good beams yesterday." "I know. We still got 30 feet to finish. Connection to the barn's not done." "I know that too." Noah set the lumber down and stepped away, breathing hard. "Maybe Virgil's right." Elijah looked up sharply. "I didn't say I agree," Noah said quickly. "But I'm tired of them talking like you've lost it." "They don't see what's coming," Elijah said. "Then show them," Noah snapped. "Show me." Elijah's jaw tightened. His breath steamed between his teeth. He looked out at the maze. To anyone else it was nonsense, but not to him. Every curve, every bend had been mapped to break wind channel heat and shield movement. He'd calculated angles based on sunfall wind drift, and instinct passed down like story. "You remember the winter of '59, he asked. "I wasn't born. Sarah and I lost 23 head to a whiteout. Couldn't move, couldn't even see the barn. They froze standing. Noah didn't answer. I swore it wouldn't happen again." From behind them came the clop of hooves. Virgil had dismounted. The wind had picked up again, pulling at the flaps of his coat. "You can still bring some to my barn," he said. 50 head easy. The rest, well, no one's gonna save everything." Elijah turned slowly. "I'm not here to save some. I'm here to save them all." Virgil snorted. "You sound like a preacher." Elijah stepped down from the walkway. His legs trembled. He was too old for this kind of labor, too stubborn to stop. "I don't need saving," he said, "and I don't need you." Virgil took a step closer. "No one wants to see you fail, Elijah, but you're putting that boy's future into nails and guesswork." Noah looked away. "Storm like this," Virgil continued, "don't care how smart you think you are." Elijah stared at him for a long time. Then he turned and picked up the rope again. "You're right," he said. "It doesn't care. But I do." He began wrapping rope around the next joint. Virgil hesitated, then mounted his horse and rode off without another word. The cold deepened as the light faded. Snow clung to every surface. The maize groaned under wind. Elijah worked through it. Every swing of the hammer echoed like a heartbeat. When his fingers stopped responding, he finally headed back to the cabin. Noah was already inside, crouched by the fire. Maggie stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "You look like you wrestled a grizzly," she said. He dropped the hammer on the table. "Might have been easier." She walked to the stove, poured him coffee. "Virgil stopped by," she said. "I saw him. He thinks you're losing it." "Good. That means he's thinking." She handed him the mug. "You're chasing something, Elijah. And if it's not ghosts, it's Sarah." He didn't answer. She softened. "You still got a chance to keep Noah safe." That's what she'd want. He drank the coffee in silence. Outside, the wind screamed louder. The cattle wouldn't last another week, maybe not even 3 days. The storm wasn't just coming, it was already here, quiet and waiting. And the maize cracked beams, and all was the only thing standing between life and what rode in behind that wind. Elijah looked at his son sleeping in the corner, then back out the window. Tomorrow he'd need more rope, and maybe a miracle. Storms like that don't show on maps. They ride inside the bones of the land, and inside men who listen close enough. Elijah Blackhorse. By morning, the cold had settled deeper into the floorboards. The fire still crackled in the cast-iron stove, but it barely touched the frost creeping along the window panes. Elijah rubbed the sleep from his eyes and sat up slowly, his knees stiff from the night on the floor. The cabin was quiet except for the soft snore of his son curled under a wool blanket, and the soft clink of snowflakes tapping the glass, delicate like glass beads from a child's necklace. He pulled on his coat and boots, then stepped outside into a silence too still for comfort. The wind had stopped. Not calmed, stopped. No movement. No rustle in the cottonwoods. No lowing from the herd. Even the birds had vanished. It was the kind of stillness Elijah remembered from one other time. December decades back, before most men on this land carried radios or rifles that didn't jam. The year his grandfather told him the earth was holding its breath. He walked the line of the walkway maze, checking the ropes he'd tied the night before. They held but barely. The cracked beam bowed slightly under the weight of drifted snow. He traced the grain with his glove fingers, moving gently, like touching a wound he couldn't mend. Papa Noah's voice called from the porch. "You're not even gonna eat first." Elijah turned and gave a nod. "Fire's still warm. It'll keep." Noah joined him, breath puffing in the cold. He wore Sarah's old scarf wound twice around his neck. It had blue stitching at the corners, her handiwork from the winter Noah was born. Winds died off, the boy said, scanning the treetops. That a good sign? Elijah shook his head. Means it's gathering strength. Feels peaceful. That's how it always feels. Right before. They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the air that had no sound. Elijah gestured toward the ridge. You see that snow line's lower than yesterday? Mm-hmm. And the sky's sinking. Look at the color. Gunmetal and bone. Noah frowned. It just looks like a storm. Not just. You'll learn the difference. They turned back toward the barn, snow crunching beneath their boots. Gramps used to say Elijah began his voice quieter. Now the earth speaks before it breaks. Not in words, in warnings. He'd sit real still, stare at the cottonwoods and say they were shaking different. Said their branches twitched like fingers when a bad freeze was coming. I thought he was half mad. Was he only half? They reached the barn, the cattle still huddled along the fence line. From a distance they looked fine, but Elijah could see the slow drag of their breath. Fatigue was setting in. One more night exposed and the weaker ones would fall. Inside, Raymond Littlefeather was feeding hay into the troughs with a pitchfork, his breath short and sharp in the freezing air. You're late, he said, tossing a flake of alfalfa down. These girls are hungry. Elijah gave a short grunt. They'll be hungrier when the snow locks them in. Raymond stopped. You're still betting it'll get that bad. I'm not betting anything. I'm remembering. Raymond wiped his brow with a sleeve. You ever seen a maize save cattle before? No. Then what makes you think it will? Elijah picked up the end of a lead rope and began tying knots with it, fast and precise. Because when the last big freeze came through, I lost 24. Watched one drop right in front of the barn. Snow filled her lungs like she was drowning. I promised Sarah I'd never watch that again. Raymond went quiet. From outside, hoofbeats approached fast and sloppy. Noah peeked through the barn door. Maggie's here. Raymond muttered. She's gonna raise hell. Elijah didn't flinch. She always does it with good aim. Moments later, Maggie Washaki stormed through the barn doors, cheeks pink, from wind hair tucked under her knit cap, a satchel slung over one shoulder. Tell me you're not still building that madness, she said without greeting. I'm still building that madness. She looked around the barn at the maze of rope tools and lumber. You know how many people in town think you've gone off the deep end? I've got no use for shallow water. Maggie dropped her satchel on a hay bale and pointed a finger at Noah. And you? What are you doing, helping him run straight into bankruptcy? Noah looked between her and his father. He's got a plan. So did the Donner Party. Elijah exhaled, slow and steady. I didn't ask you to come here. No. But Sarah would have. At the sound of her name, something flickered in Elijah's eyes. Maggie softened slightly. I'm not your enemy, Eli. But the whole valley's watching you burn your future on a pile of lumber. And I'm watching you drag this boy with you. Elijah met her gaze. You think this is about me being stubborn? But it's not. It's about reading the signs. She crossed her arms. And what signs are those? He pointed out the barn door. The horses wouldn't drink this morning. The coyotes stopped howling 2 nights back. I saw 5 crows circle over the ridge without a sound. You tell me if that's nothing. Maggie opened her mouth, then shut it. We're out of money, Noah said quietly, and almost out of good wood. Raymond nodded. We finish what we can. Hope it holds. Maggie studied the 3 of them like she was trying to decide if they were men or fools. Credit's dry, she said. Even Johnson at the mill won't float you another board. I figured, Elijah said. Maggie sighed. I'll talk to the clinic. Maybe they'll float a supply run in exchange for work hours. Elijah looked at her for the first time that morning, really looked. You'd do that for Sarah's boy, she said. But you need to finish something soon. Even a miracle needs a foundation. She turned and left without another word, footsteps fading into the snow. Elijah walked back to the center beam of the maze and ran his hand along its spine. You think she's right? Noah asked behind him. I think she's afraid. And fear makes folks hold tight to what they know. What if we don't finish in time? Elijah didn't answer. The sky had turned to stone, low and thick with clouds that didn't move. The kind of clouds that bore down, not passed over. Snow began to fall again, slow, steady, heavy. Not soft flurries, but the kind that clumped and packed into weight. He grabbed the hammer and handed it to Noah. We'll need to work through the night. Noah's fingers closed around the handle. We'll need more nails. And rope, Elijah added. Lots more rope. The land don't take what it hasn't already marked for loss. Maggie was shucky. The truck sputtered, once coughed like a dying smoker, and finally quit halfway up the icy hill outside Lander. Elijah Blackhorse sat behind the wheel, gloved hands clenched around it, like it might come back to life if he gripped harder. Snow gathered on the windshield wipers, useless and frozen stiff. Noah leaned forward in the passenger seat, peering through the fogged glass. Should I push? We're past the worst grade. Let gravity help. Elijah opened the door and stepped out, boots crunching into slush and road salt. The wind here wasn't fierce like it was on the ranch. It was sluggish and damp like it had already given up fighting. They coasted the last 200 feet to Johnson's Lumber. The building leaned heavy under snow, the sign dangling by one chain, swinging slow like a broken pendulum. A rusted bell clanked as Elijah pushed open the door. Morning, he said. Carl Johnson looked up from behind the counter, his glasses sitting low on his nose and his breath puffing white in the chill air. Heard you were coming. Word gets around. Not fast, just loud. Elijah removed his gloves. Need 20 more boards. Pine or fir, whatever you'll let go. Carl closed his ledger. You still running that fever dream out there? It's coming together. You owe me more than most folks make in a year. Can't extend credit unless you put something down. Elijah glanced at Noah, then back at Carl. I'll bring in the backup generator from the barn. And my saddle real leather hand-tooled. Carl gave a short, skeptical laugh. And what happens when that contraption of yours collapses under the weight of a snowdrift? Then I won't need the saddle. Carl stared at him, weighing pity against caution. Finally, he nodded toward the yard. Go pick out what you need. But this is the last time, Eli. They loaded the boards in silence. Noah worked fast, jaw tight. He hadn't said much on the drive in, and he said even less now. When they climbed back into the truck, the heater barely coughed warm. You think that was smart? Noah asked finally. Elijah pulled onto the road. No, but it was necessary. They rode the rest of the way home with the radio off. Back at the ranch, Raymond was waiting, stomping his boots by the porch. Took you long enough, he said. Storm shifted direction. We've got less than 2 days, maybe less. Maggie came by again. She left canned stew and a warning. What kind of warning? Elijah asked. Town council met this morning. They're talking about calling tribal leadership into this. They think you're unstable. Noah stiffened. They're going to try to stop him. Raymond shrugged. Maybe not directly, but they're stirring up talk. You know how fast fear travels around here. Elijah stared out across the snow-covered pasture. The sky had turned a dull copper sun, fighting to push through heavy clouds. "Let 'em talk," he said. "We'll finish what we started." Inside, Maggie had left a note on the table in her tight handwriting. "Eli, people are nervous. Some think you're endangering more than just your own land. Be smart. Come see me." Next to it sat 3 cans of stew, a small sack of cornmeal, and a folded handkerchief that had belonged to Sarah. Noah picked it up, ran his thumb along the hem. She kept this in her apron pocket. Elijah nodded. She'd wipe her hands on it when she was nervous. Raymond lit the stove and tossed a few logs in. "The cattle won't wait forever. They've started to drift east along the tree line. Wind's got them restless. We'll corral them tomorrow," Elijah said. "Walk 'em through the trial run." Raymond leaned against the wall. "You sure they'll take to it? No. But if they don't, nothing else will save them." That night the wind picked up again. Not howling yet, just rising like a whisper at the edge of sleep. Elijah sat at the table with the handkerchief folded in his palm. Noah sat across from him, fiddling with a bolt from the walkway's hinge bracket. "We're down to 30 feet of good planking," Noah said. "Maybe less." Elijah didn't look up. "Then we use rope, or strip some of the older fence sections." Noah hesitated. "Mama worked for years to build this place up." "I know. Sold beadwork. Drove to Riverton in the rain with busted tires just to pick up flour. I remember." Elijah closed his eyes for a moment. "So do I. If this fails, it won't." Noah's jaw tightened. "You don't know that. I feel it." Noah leaned back in the chair. "What happens if we don't finish? Or if the storm comes early?" Elijah looked at his son for a long time. "Then we do what we've always done. We adapt." Outside the barn groaned in the wind. Raymond knocked once and stepped inside. "You better come see this." They followed him out onto the porch, where the snow was piling fast again. The clouds had thickened the sky, taking on a greenish hue Elijah hadn't seen in years. At the edge of the property, 3 men on horseback sat watching the house. Virgil Red Elk was one of them. "They've been there 20 minutes, Raymond said. "Ain't said a word. Just watching. Trying to figure out how far gone I am," Elijah muttered. Noah swallowed hard. "You think they'll try to stop us?" Elijah didn't answer. Instead, he stepped down into the snow and walked out toward them. When he reached the fence line, Virgil raised his chin. "You still building?" Elijah nodded. "Till the hammer breaks or the sky falls." Virgil looked past him at the house. "You dragging that boy down with you?" "He's not a boy anymore." The man to Virgil's right, Harold Spooner, scowled. "You mortgaged everything, Black Horse. Your wife's beads, your horses, your pride. For what? A snake." Trail through the snow, Elijah turned slowly to look at his land. That snake trail might be the only thing standing between 400 head and a blizzard that'll kill him standing. The third man, younger, said nothing. His eyes flicked nervously across the pasture. Virgil cleared his throat. "You always were a hard one to bend." Elijah stepped closer. "And you always were a coward in a storm." The air tightened like a drumhead. Then Virgil chuckled once. "Let's hope your hammer holds." They turned their horses and rode off. As Elijah walked back to the porch, Noah stepped down to meet him. "What if they try something?" Elijah placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Then we hold the line." Inside, the wind pressed harder against the windows. The land had made its mark. Now it was only a matter of time before it came to collect. "You want to believe he's right, I get it. But belief won't hold up a walkway when it splits down the center. Raymond Littlefeather. The sharp crack split the morning like a rifle shot. Elijah dropped his coffee mid-sip and was out the door before the mug hit the porch. Raymond was already running toward the maze boots, slipping on the packed snow. By the time Elijah reached the sagging middle section, his stomach had already turned to stone. One of the main vertical beams, the post supporting the walkway's central turn, had split down the grain from top to base. The weight of snow and wind had bowed it inward. Nails had popped out, leaving a dangerous dip in the structure. If a steer walked over it now, the whole thing could buckle and crush beneath it. Noah climbed up beside him, eyes wide. How bad Elijah didn't answer. He crouched low, studying the post with one gloved hand pressed to the beam, feeling the tremble of stress still running through it. Raymond caught up breath coming hard. Saw it from the barn. Thought maybe just the snow settled. But it's worse than that. Elijah stood. We'll reinforce it. With what Raymond snapped. We use the last of the good boards on the north line. We'll use the fence planks. They're dry-rotted. You said so yourself. Then we use rope. Cross-brace it. Shore it from both sides. Raymond kicked snow at the base of the cracked post. You keep patching holes in a dam, you're gonna drown when the whole thing gives out. Noah looked between them. We've got maybe 20 feet left to finish the run to the barn. Raymond turned on him. If we use that lumber here, we don't finish the maze. The path ends in open snow. So we make a choice, Noah said. Elijah turned slowly, eyes heavy. There's no good choice. If we leave this post as is, it could collapse under the herd. If we don't finish the run to the barn, they've got nowhere to go. Either way, we lose. Raymond paced a few feet, muttering. You built this whole thing on borrowed time and broken planks. You think hope's gonna hold it together. I built it because the old way isn't enough anymore, Elijah said, voice steady. You think you can just ride out another winter like it's 1962. But the land's changing. Raymond's eyes narrowed. And what if you're wrong? Elijah looked out across the fields where the cattle moved like black specks in the white. Then I'll lose everything trying to protect what matters. Noah's voice was quiet. Mama would have backed him. Raymond sighed hard. Damn it. I didn't come out here to die in a carpenter's riddle. We're not dying, Elijah said. We're finishing it. By mid-morning, the wind had picked up again. Snow came in flurries, blowing sideways in brief fits, then settling into thick silence. Elijah and Noah worked on bracing the cracked post with rope and makeshift struts from salvaged wood. Nothing pretty, nothing permanent, just enough to hold tension. Raymond returned with the last good boards from the supply shed. If we're doing this, he muttered, we're doing it right. Elijah nodded once. We'll run the connection to the barn tonight. Work through the dark if we have to. They moved fast, not speaking more than necessary. Their movements had become automatic hammer measure brace lift. Each nail driven was a gamble, each plank a prayer. By the time the sun fell, the maze twisted through the snow like the skeleton of something alive. It wasn't beautiful, but it held. The final stretch to the barn sloped gently, turning slightly east to account for wind drift. Raymond lit a lantern and held it high. The maze glowed in patches, pale orange halos against dark wood and snow. She'll hold, Noah said under his breath. Maybe Raymond said. But that post back there still looks like it's ready to snap. It's braced, Elijah said. Braced, Raymond repeated. Not fixed. Inside the cabin, Maggie was waiting by the stove, arms crossed, her eyes sharp with quiet fury. You boys look like ghosts, she said. You eat anything, Raymond dropped onto a chair and exhaled. We're running on spite and coffee. Maggie handed him a cup. There's more in the pot. Sit. Warm up. Elijah pulled off his gloves, fingers raw. We finished it. Her expression didn't change. And the beam braced. She didn't look impressed. You praying it holds? Not praying, Elijah said. Just building. Maggie turned to Noah. You've been checking the cattle twice a day, Noah said. They're getting restless. Last storm scattered them some, but they're sticking close to the tree line. Maggie stirred the stew on the stove, her motions sharp. Saw the red elks in town. Word is folks think the tribal council should step in. They won't, Elijah said. Not unless someone forces their hand. Virgil's trying to do exactly that. Let him, Elijah muttered. They can bring every man they've got, but unless one of them knows how to stop a storm from flattening a herd, they're wasting their time. She set a bowl in front of him. I just hope that walkway of yours works. Otherwise, you're not the only one who'll pay for it. Raymond took his bowl to the window and watched the wind tug at the porch lantern. You ever see clouds stack like that? He asked. They all looked. The western sky was bruised purple, a deep, low mass creeping over the mountains like a giant's shoulder. Elijah stood slowly. That's not normal cloud cover. Maggie moved beside him. I've worked this land my whole life. Never seen it look like that. Elijah nodded once, almost to himself. It's starting. Raymond turned. Starting. You mean pressure's dropping. You feel it in your teeth. Tomorrow by sundown we'll be in it. The room fell quiet. Noah looked to his father. Then we bring the cattle in first light. Elijah reached for his coat. No. We wait. Wait, Maggie asked. You just said if we move them too early they'll panic. Walkways aren't familiar yet. And if the wind hits while they're halfway through, we lose control. Raymond's voice was low. And if we wait too long, Elijah looked at him, then we lose everything. Outside, the wind shifted. It came from the northwest, now colder, harder, laced with grit. The porch lantern blew out. You think you're alone in this, but when your madness takes others down with you, it stops being your business. Virgil Red Elk. By dawn, the air had changed. The storm wasn't just approaching. It had started whispering through every crack in the wood, curling cold fingers beneath doors and windows. The light outside was a pale, bruised gray, and the trees swayed with nervous tension. Elijah Blackhorse stepped onto the porch, mug in hand, steam curling past his face and vanishing. The clouds were low-hunched, pressing against the ridgeline like a herd too big for the valley. Wind stirred in short testing bursts. The real force hadn't arrived yet, but the land knew what was coming. So did he. Bootsteps crunched behind him. Raymond came out, coat half-buttoned, gloves already on. We should move the cattle, he said. Get them started toward the maize before the wind hits hard. Elijah shook his head. Not yet. If we spook them too early, they'll scatter. They'll scatter worse if we wait too long. Elijah didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. Raymond shifted. You slept some. I didn't. They stood in silence, listening to the creak of trees and the distant thrum of snow sliding off the barn roof. Hoofbeats broke the stillness. Elijah turned first. 3 riders pushed through the snowy trail from the east. Their horses moved slow, stiff with the cold. Virgil Red Elk led them, his coat dusted white and his hat pulled low. Behind him rode Harold Spooner and Teresa Two Bulls. All 3 wore expressions like stone. Raymond muttered, "Here we go." The riders dismounted in a practiced line like men used to confrontation. Elijah stayed on the porch. He didn't invite them up. "You're pushing this too far," Black Horse Virgil said. "No greeting, no lead-in." Elijah sipped his coffee. "Morning to you, too. You built your walkway, you proved your point. Now it's time to act like a man with something to lose. I've already lost plenty." "Then why risk what's left?" Teresa asked, stepping forward. Her voice didn't have the edge Virgil's did, more concern than challenge. "This isn't just about your cattle anymore. Word's spreading. Folks are scared. They're saying if your maze fails, it's going to break more than just your herd. It's going to turn this whole valley upside down." Harold nodded. "Kids are asking questions. Families are watching their stock and wondering if they should have followed you. And now it's too late to copy it, even if they wanted to." Elijah crossed his arms. "No one believed me 3 weeks ago." "3 weeks ago you weren't dragging others down with you," Virgil snapped. "You think you're alone in this, but when your madness takes others down with you, it stops being your business." Noah came out onto the porch beside his father. Maggie stepped out. Next, arms folded tight across her chest, her eyes like flint. "You call it madness," Elijah said, looking down at Virgil. "But it's preparation. The land's been warning us for months. You just didn't want to hear it." Harold scowled. "And what if you're wrong? What if you built all this, sold everything you had, turned your son's future to sawdust, and it all comes crashing down anyway?" Elijah didn't blink. "Then I'll know I fought with everything I had, and you'll bring ruin on anyone who believed you." Noah stepped forward. "Nobody made them follow. They watched. They chose." "You're 16, Virgil said. "You don't know what it means to lose everything." Noah's hands balled into fists. "I watched my mother die. I watched my father sell her beadwork and his horses to buy rope. Don't tell me I don't know loss." Teresa's voice cut through the cold. "We're not here to fight. We're here to ask, what's your plan if the walkways fail? Do you have one?" Elijah stared at her. "No." That hung in the air for a long beat. "Then we have to act," Virgil said. "We're organizing a backup. South Barn's open. We can take 50, maybe 60 head. Save the strongest breeders. It's not perfect, but it's something." Elijah's jaw tensed. Splitting the herds worse than keeping them together. "They'll panic. Tear fences, trample the calves. You know that. It's still better than betting everything on a wooden skeleton." "We're not moving them," Elijah said. "The maze stands. We stand with it." Maggie stepped off the porch. "He's not backing down." "You all knew he wouldn't." Virgil looked at her disappointment flickering behind his eyes. "You're still backing him. I'm backing what he built." Teresa turned toward her horse. "We hope it works. For everyone's sake." They left without another word, the horses pushing through rising drifts. Elijah watched until they disappeared behind the ridge. Raymond spoke first. "They're not coming back just to talk next time." "I know." Noah's voice was lower. "What if they try to move the cattle themselves, then they'll drive them into a blizzard," Elijah said, "and blood will be on their hands." Maggie rubbed her hands together. "Storm's accelerating. Barometer dropped 7 points overnight." "We get ready," Elijah said. The wind hit harder that afternoon. The sky was a flat, sickly green. Trees bent and groaned. The snow came in fits, heavy then brief, building up like it was trying to catch its breath before the final blow. Inside, they packed feed into sacks. Elijah checked every nail in the barn ramp. Raymond reinforced the weakest joints. Noah made torch bundles from oil-soaked rags. The cattle gathered tighter in the lee of the trees, pressed together for warmth. A few calves cried out, but were quickly muffled by the wind. At dusk, the sound changed. It wasn't just wind anymore. It was pressure deep and invisible curling around the eaves, sliding under the floorboards, rattling hinges. A force trying to peel the world open. They stood inside the cabin lamps, flickering breath visible. Maggie pressed a hand to the window. "This is it." Raymond looked to Elijah. "We move them tomorrow." Elijah nodded once. "Dawn." Noah leaned on the table. "What if we can't see the path?" "We find it anyway." A gust slammed into the house hard enough to shake the floor. Outside, the maze groaned. One long, low creak like something old deciding whether or not to hold. "This ain't weather. This is war. The kind the land fights with silence and time." Maggie was shaky. The sky collapsed just before midnight. Not with thunder or lightning, but with a pressure that pressed down from above like a second earth. The air was no longer air. It was something heavier, more ancient, laced with ice so fine it cut skin, git on contact. The snow didn't fall. It attacked sideways in sheets so thick, the world disappeared beyond arm's length. Inside the cabin, the walls groaned. Wind clawed at every seam and crack, rattling the windows in their frames, trying to peel the place apart like a crow working at a carcass. Elijah stood at the front window, arms crossed tight, his breath fogging the glass with each exhale. He hadn't slept. None of them had. In the corner, Noah was wrapped in a quilt, eyes wide open, staring at the flames. Raymond sat on the floor near the door, his back against the wall, fingers twitching against his knee. Maggie paced in slow circles near the stove, her face pale with tension. "This ain't weather," she said, voice flat, more to herself than anyone else. "This is war. The kind the land fights with silence and time." Elijah nodded. "She's only just begun." Raymond stood. "We can't wait till dawn. Cattle'll freeze where they stand." "We can't move in this whiteout," Elijah said. "We'd lose half the herd trying to find the maze." Noah spoke up, his voice cracking. "What if they've already scattered?" Maggie stopped pacing. "You planned for instincts, Eli. You built that thing banking on the cattle seeking shelter." "They will," he said, but his tone was thinner than it had been a day ago. "They will." The wind howled again, louder this time, like something screaming from the far end of the world. They all flinched. Raymond crossed to the door, cracking it open. The snow hit him in the face like a slap. He shut it fast. "I couldn't see the porch railing," he said. "And it's only 10 feet away." Noah stood, throwing off the blanket. "I'm going out." Elijah turned. "No. They could be dying right now. You go out there and get turned around, you'll freeze before you even know you're lost. I'd rather freeze looking than stay in here waiting for them to die." Elijah stepped toward him, grabbed his shoulder. "And if you die out there, what am I supposed to do with that?" Noah looked away. Jaw clenched, breath sharp through his nose. "We should have moved them earlier." "I know." That hung in the air, too honest to soften. Maggie sat slowly at the table. "We have rope, don't we?" Raymond blinked. "What rope?" "Tie it to the porch. Anchor every 20 feet to something solid. You can feel your way through even if you can't see." Elijah met her eyes. "You're talking about guiding ourselves blind through a death wind. Better than doing nothing." Raymond nodded. "We've got a few spools left." Noah was already at the supply cabinet, dragging out coils of heavy frayed line. "All right," Elijah said, grabbing his coat. "We run a rope to the maze entrance. No farther. If they're not there, we come back. That's it. Maggie handed them scarves, gloves, extra wool. Cover every inch. This cold will bite straight through your skin if you let it. The door opened, and the storm reached in like a hand. They moved together. Elijah first tethered to the porch post, the rope wrapped tight around his waist. Raymond followed, then Noah. They crouched low and leaned into the wind, each step a battle against the force that wanted them gone. Snow lashed their faces, needles of ice that turned every breath into fire. Visibility was zero. Only the rope connected them to each other and to life. It was like walking blind through a blizzard that had swallowed the world. 10 feet. 20. 40. Elijah felt the rope go slack for a second, then jerk as Raymond stumbled. He pulled steady and slow, keeping them all together. Finally, his glove brushed the wood of the maze's first support beam. He wrapped the rope around it twice and tied off. "We're here," he shouted over the wind, though his voice barely carried. They ducked behind the maze's wall. Even just 3 feet of structure made a difference. The wind still cut, but the worst of it broke above their heads. Elijah held up his lantern, shielding it with his coat. The flame flickered dim and sickly. Shapes moved ahead, low, wide, shifting. He stepped forward. A pair of eyes glinted in the lantern's glow. Then another. Then a dozen more. Cattle. Huddled inside the first curve of the walkway, pressed tight together, steaming with breath, their bodies forming a wall of heat and weight. Elijah's knees nearly gave out. They had made it. He counted quickly, too hard to be exact. But at least 50 head were packed in, standing quietly, snow crusted on their backs, but alive. Raymond reached his side, then Noah. "They're here," Elijah said, voice hoarse. "They found it." Noah's eyes filled. "We didn't lose them. Some, maybe," Elijah said. "But not all." Raymond turned toward the wind. "We need to get back. This cold, it's going to kill anything out in the open by morning." They tied another rope from the walkway to the first turn in the maze. Then they followed the tether back to the porch. Inside, Maggie met them with towels and hot broth. Her eyes scanned their faces. Elijah spoke through chattering teeth. "They're in the maze. They're using it." Maggie closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank God." Noah dropped into a chair, shivering hard. "We need to check the rest of the maze. Tomorrow." Elijah nodded. "First light. If there is light." The wind rattled the windows again. Somewhere outside, a plank cracked, a sound like wood screaming. Raymond looked toward the noise. That was the center post. Elijah stood, every muscle aching. "We reinforced it. It'll hold." No one argued, but no one looked certain. The thermometer on the wall read 42 below. Noah curled under his blanket again, staring at the door. "They're not all safe yet," he said. "No," Elijah said. "Not yet. They're gone, Papa. Either the storm swallowed them, or they walked into death trying to escape your dream." Noah Blackhorse. The morning didn't come with light, it came with less darkness. A dim, smothered gray bled through the windows, and Elijah Blackhorse knew, before opening his eyes, that the storm hadn't passed. It had simply changed shape, sinking lower, heavier, more settled in its silence. The cabin was cold, despite the stove burning red in the corner. Even fire had trouble holding on in this weather. Noah was already by the door, coat on scarf tied, eyes hollow, from too little sleep and too much fear. Elijah sat up. "You're going out." "They might be gone," Noah said, voice flat. "We need to know." Raymond stirred from the floor beside the hearth, rubbing his eyes. "What time is it?" "Doesn't matter," Noah said. "We've waited too long already." Elijah stood and grabbed his boots. "We go together." Maggie met them with thick gloves and another length of rope. "Visibility's worse than last night. You'll need double the line." Noah didn't look at her. "If they're not there, we need to look farther." "If they're not there," Maggie said, "then they're not anywhere." He flinched, but said nothing. Elijah gave her a nod, tied the rope to the porch beam, and opened the door. The wind wasn't howling now. It had settled into something more dangerous, a constant low pressure that sucked warmth from skin and hope from the bones. Snow drifted like fog. There were no sharp flakes anymore, just dense rolling curtains of white. They followed the tether past the porch out to the walkway. Elijah held the lantern high, though its glow barely reached his boots. The world was a ghost, and they were walking blind inside it. The first turn in the maze was empty, so was the next, and the one after that. No hoofprints, no breath, no sound. Just snow climbing up the sides of the wooden corridor, wind slipping over the top and dropping cold into every corner. Noah gripped the beam beside him and leaned his head against it. "They're gone, Papa." Elijah moved past him, scanning the snow. "They could have pushed farther in. They're gone. Either the storm swallowed them, or they walked into death trying to escape your dream." Elijah said nothing, just kept walking. They reached the cracked post. It held but just barely. Ropes groaned against strain, and the whole section sagged like a tired spine. Ice had formed over the wood, locking it into a brittle shell. Raymond stopped beside it. "This won't last another night." Elijah didn't respond. Ahead, the walkway vanished into white. Noah yanked off his glove and pressed his hand to the post. "Do you feel it?" "The way it trembles, like it's waiting to fall. Same as all of us." Elijah turned. "We reinforced it." "Like that matters. Everything here is barely holding." Elijah stepped close. "We don't quit in the middle of a storm." "We're past the middle," Noah snapped. "We might be too late." His breath came quick, face flushed with cold and frustration. "You promised they'd find the maze, that the herd would know where to go." "I didn't promise," Elijah said. "I hoped." "Then what's the difference? They're still gone." Raymond's voice cut in from behind them. "We keep checking. Just a little farther." They pushed on. The next bend in the maze showed signs of passage. Snow disturbed a plank, scratched, something knocked over. Then hoofprints. Just a few, but real. Elijah's heart kicked once in his chest. Raymond spotted them too. They were here. "Not enough," Noah muttered. Another turn. More tracks. Then silence. The snow grew deeper. The drifts piled higher. The walkway walls barely stuck out of the white, now buried under wind and ice. Noah sagged against the beam. They left. Panicked. Ran into the open. "You know what that means." Elijah stared into the white. It was like trying to see through memory. "I know." They turned back. When they reached the cabin, the wind had picked up again. Maggie was waiting, stove-lit broth simmering. She took one look at them and said, "You didn't find them." Elijah shook his head. "They were there last night," she whispered. "I heard you. They were in the maze." "They're not now," Noah said. Maggie looked at him, then at Elijah. "How many?" "We don't know yet," Elijah said. Raymond dropped into a chair. "If they pushed into the storm, there's no finding them in this." Maggie brought hot mugs to the table. Then we wait. Noah stood at the window, face pale. "They're gone," he said quietly. No one argued. An hour passed. Then another. The wind screamed again, higher, sharper. The sound of a tree snapping echoed across the valley, followed by silence so deep it pressed into the cabin walls. Maggie poured another round of coffee. "What now?" Elijah stared at the fire. "We watch the wind, and when it shifts, we look again." Noah slammed his mug down. "For what ghosts' carcasses buried in snow, we don't give up." Noah looked at him, eyes shining. "Even if it kills us," Elijah said nothing. From outside came a knock, slow, steady. Raymond jumped. Maggie went to the door, hand on the latch. Through the frost-covered window, a shape appeared. Marcus Wells. She opened the door. Wind howled in behind him. His coat was stiff with ice hat, frozen solid. "I can't find my cattle," he said without preamble. Elijah stood slowly. "They were penned tight," Marcus went on. "Behind the barn. We fed them at nightfall. This morning, nothing. Fence lines drifted over gates blown wide. Not a sound. Not a track." Raymond stood. Nothing. Marcus shook his head. "I checked Carlson's place. Half his herd's dead. Rodriguez lost all of theirs." The room went still. Noah swallowed. "You came here to say we're not the only ones," Marcus looked at Elijah. "I came to say, if you were right and they found that maze, they're the only cattle in this valley left alive." Maggie sat down hard. Elijah gripped the back of the chair. "We need to check again." Raymond grabbed his coat. "When the wind drops." Noah looked out at the storm. "If it drops." Elijah turned to the window. Beyond the glass, the world was still white, still moving, still silent. Somewhere out there, life might be waiting or gone for good. Either way, he would face it. He always had. Sometimes survival don't come with a trumpet. It comes quiet, like breath on frost. Raymond, little feather. The wind died just after sunrise. Not suddenly, more like a long, slow exhale. The shrieking force that had battered the cabin walls for 3 days faded to a whisper, then to stillness, until all that remained was the hush of snow shifting under its own weight. The silence that followed was massive, thick, the kind that made you scared to break it. Elijah Blackhorse stood on the porch with one hand on the railing, eyes scanning a world reshaped. The sky was pale blue, soft like worn denim. The storm clouds had scattered across the horizon in strips, revealing a sun too weak to warm, but strong enough to cast sharp light across the drifts. Fence posts were buried. Trees bent under ice. The barn roof had survived, but the snowdrift beside it was nearly as tall. The thermometer read 38 below. Better than yesterday, but not by much. Behind him, the cabin stirred. Maggie stepped out, wrapped in a shawl, her eyes squinting at the light. "It's quiet," she said. "For now," Elijah replied. Raymond came around the corner with a length of rope slung over his shoulder and frost still clinging to his beard. "I checked the west side. The outhouse is gone. Just gone." Snow swallowed the whole thing. Noah emerged from the doorway, moving slow, still stiff from the cold, and too many nights on the floor. He stood beside his father, looking out at the walkways buried under snowbanks. "You think they're still in there?" he asked quietly. Elijah didn't answer. He stared down the path past the sagging beam and toward the place where the maze curved out of sight. Maggie folded her arms. No use wondering. Only one way to find out. They layered up every scarf, glove, and scrap of warmth they could find. They tied ropes to their waists again, but this time Elijah didn't need a lantern. The morning light was bright enough to see, though it reflected off the snow with a harsh glare that made them squint and wince. Every footstep crunched like breaking glass. They reached the first turn of the maze. Still no sign of cattle. Just drifted snow curling over the walkway walls. The boards had held mostly. The structure sagged but stood the ropes and braces groaning under the weight of what they'd carried through the storm. Raymond tested a beam with his foot. She flexes like an old bone, but she's still a bone. Keep going, Elijah said. They moved in single file. Noah's eyes scanned every turn ahead, shoulders tense, jaw clenched. Then he froze. Wait, he said. Elijah stopped just behind him. Noah pointed ahead. There, look, hoof prints. Shallow at first, then deeper as the snow thinned beneath the walkway's partial cover. Then another set. And another. A whole line of them. Raymond crouched low, still warm, didn't freeze over. They're fresh. They moved faster now, but carefully. Elijah's heartbeat surged, not with excitement, but with something harder to name, relief braided with fear. Relief that maybe his design had worked. Fear that it hadn't worked enough. A few turns later, the first one came into view. A black Angus heifer, young, her coat crusted with ice, stood motionless in a widened section of the maze. She looked up at them, startled, but too weak to run. Then a second cow stepped forward from the shadows, then a third. Noah's breath caught. They're alive. Raymond let out a low, shaky laugh. Holy hell. The cattle were huddled in small clusters spread out across the protected segments of the walkway. Elijah counted 12 in the first group, another 10 farther ahead. Their hides were stiff with frost, their eyes dull, but they were standing, breathing, warmed by the narrow protection of the walls and each other. They made it. Noah whispered. Some of them, Elijah said. We keep moving. They followed the maze deeper past the sagging center post, which still held, though the top brace had cracked, and toward the barn. Each turn brought more cattle. Some lying down, others standing all quiet as if they too were waiting for a signal to move again. Maggie's voice cracked when she spoke. Look at them. Just waiting. Raymond knelt beside one of the cows, resting a hand on its side. They followed it. They knew. Not knew, Elijah said, but trusted. They followed the warmth, the shelter. That's all instinct needs. They reached the barn ramp by mid-morning. The doors had held, and inside the heat from the hay, the animals and the walls themselves had made a pocket of relative warmth. The light inside was soft and gold, and when Elijah opened the door, a rush of steamy breath met him. Inside, more cattle. Dozens. Packed together, but calm. Noah stepped in, blinking. Papa, he said slowly, I think we did it. Elijah ran his hand along the nearest beam, letting the grain bite against his glove. We did something, he said. Still need to count. Still need to find the rest. Maggie walked among them, eyes scanning, hand brushing against a calf's ear. They're tired, but they're alive. Raymond leaned against the wall. Sometimes survival don't come with a trumpet. It comes quiet like breath on frost. Noah nodded. So what now? We count. Elijah said. We check every section, every turn, and we bury the ones that didn't make it. Raymond looked down. You think we lost many, we'll know soon enough. They split up, moving down the various paths, eyes sharp, steps slow. Not all the cattle had made it. At one corner of the maze, they found signs of a stampede, deep gouges in the wood, broken boards, blood in the snow. 2 cows had gone down there, trampled in panic when the wind shifted, or maybe when another stumbled. Farther along, a calf had frozen beside the outer wall, its small body, stiff eyes glassed over. Maggie closed them gently with her scarf. Raymond marked the spot. By the time the sun had risen high enough to throw long shadows over the walkway, they had accounted for most of the herd. And by the time they returned to the barn, Elijah was already running numbers in his head. He stood just outside the door, staring at the maze stretching into white behind him. It held, Noah said. It worked. Elijah nodded slow. It did. But he didn't smile. He was thinking about the next freeze and the next storm, and the fact that a few dozen cattle huddled in wooden walls wasn't a miracle, it was a margin. A narrow one. He turned back to the barn and stepped inside. A man can be right and still lose what matters most. That's the price of trying to outthink the earth. Maggie was shaky. The count was worse than Elijah expected. He kept track in his worn leather notebook, every line a mark that etched deeper into his chest. Maggie and Raymond moved quietly through the barn, checking for stragglers, sick ones, the wounded. Noah worked the outer walkways, marking the fallen with strips of red cloth. The maze had worked, just not without cost. They'd saved 378 head. 22 were dead. The numbers were good, by ranch standards even miraculous. But Elijah didn't feel like a man who'd won. Not as he stood over the body of a steer wedged between 2 slats, its legs broken during the stampede near the north turn. Not when he saw the calf that had frozen beside the outer wall. Not when he looked at the cracked post still leaning like a warning. He had built something no one believed in, and it had done what it was meant to do. But it hadn't been enough to save them all. Maggie found him at the center of the maze, kneeling beside one of the fallen. She was young, she said, crouching next to him. That one we called Daisy, always trailed behind the herd. Elijah rested a hand on the cow's side. I remember. They sat there for a moment, surrounded by the stillness of the aftermath. The storm had passed. The sun had returned. But in its place was a landscape stripped bare, altered. You did what nobody else would have tried, Maggie said. Elijah didn't look at her. And still lost 22. Her voice was softer. A man can be right and still lose what matters most. That's the price of trying to outthink the earth. Elijah looked up at the walls of the maze, the knots of rope, the crooked angles, the places where boards had bent under strain but hadn't broken. Was it pride, he asked, that I wouldn't take Virgil's offer? That I had to finish this no matter what? Maggie took a slow breath. Maybe. But it wasn't just pride. It was something else. Something older. He nodded once. You're thinking of Sarah, she added. I sold her beadwork, he said. Her favorite saddle. Even the silver dollars she hid in the sugar tin for Noah's future. She would have done the same, Maggie said. You know that. He didn't answer. They stood together and began the walk back toward the barn. Along the way, Raymond approached, wiping his hands on a rag. North side walkway needs a full rebuild, he said. That cracked post split all the way through. Surprised it didn't go down with the first gust. Let it rest for now, Elijah said. We reinforce it tomorrow. Raymond nodded. Noah's at the barn. Said Marcus is coming back. Elijah's brow lifted. Back, yeah. Brought 2 other ranchers with him. Says they want to see the maze for themselves. Maggie raised an eyebrow. Word travels fast when it's hungry for answers. They reached the barn just as Marcus Wells rode in, flanked by Tomas Rodriguez and June Carlson. Their horses moved slow, carefully, navigating the uneven ground and snow-choked pasture. Marcus dismounted and stepped forward, looking haggard but determined. His coat was still frosted from travel eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. "I counted 24 in the South Gully," he said without preamble. "Dead and buried. Tomas lost 70. "June 84, she said, face tight. Noah stepped down from the barn loft, wiping dust from his sleeves. "Ours are mostly alive," he said. Mays held. Marcus looked past him at the wooden corridor winding through the drifts. So it did. He moved forward, running his glove over one of the planks. "Doesn't look like much." "Didn't need to," Elijah said. "Just had to do one thing, break the wind and guide their feet." Tomas tilted his head. "How'd they know to follow it?" "They didn't," Elijah said. "But when the storm came, they went looking. And this was the only thing standing tall." June stepped inside the walkway, looking down its length. You could feel it warmer here, quieter. Raymond chuckled under his breath. "Maze traps their body heat. Wind can't tunnel through the turns. Small air pockets hold just enough warmth to keep them from freezing." Marcus rubbed the bridge of his nose. "You knew this would work, no?" Elijah said. "I just couldn't afford for it not to." The ranchers were quiet for a moment, watching the steam rise from the barn and the cattle moving slowly along the maize paths, single file toward the feeding troughs. June stepped closer. "You gonna share the design if you want it," Elijah said. "You'll have to build it yourself. Same way I did. One board, one breath at a time." Marcus held out his hand. "I was wrong about you." Elijah looked at the hand for a long second, then took it. "I didn't build this for pride," he said. "I built it because I've seen what storms can take. And I wasn't going to let this one have everything." As they talked, more figures appeared on the ridge. Neighbors, ranchers, riders coming slow through the white. Word had traveled. The man who built the fool's maze had outlived the storm, and now they came not to mock, but to learn. Maggie watched them gather. "Looks like you started something," she said. Elijah gave a small nod. "Let's just hope it lasts longer than the next snow." They spent the rest of the afternoon clearing broken planks, feeding the weak cattle, checking hooves and eyes. Every surviving animal was a small miracle, and every fallen one was a name Elijah wouldn't forget. By dusk, the wind returned, but softer this time, more like breath than blade. Inside the barn, Noah leaned against a post and looked at his father. "You think she would have been proud?" Elijah looked up. Sarah Noah nodded. "I think she would have said I was crazy," then picked up a hammer and helped finish it. They both smiled, faint but real. From the loft, Raymond called down, "You should see the valley. Looks like a new country out there." Elijah walked out onto the barn ramp and looked across the land. The snow still covered everything, but the walkways rose from it that like veins alive, leading from paddock to barn to pasture. Steam rose in narrow columns from the maize, the breath of a herd that had weathered the worst. And in the distance, other ranchers began measuring, sketching, and laying out planks. The maize had worked. But Elijah knew the storm hadn't just tested wood and rope, it had tested memory, will, hope. He'd passed barely, and he wasn't the only one who'd need to rebuild. "They didn't come to praise you, Eli. They came to take a piece of what you bled for." Maggie was shaky. By the third day after the storm, the land had quieted, but the people had not. Boot tracks cut deep into the drifts outside Elijah Blackhorse's barn, rows of them from all directions. Ranchers, riders, even a few outsiders from downstate had begun to appear. Some came alone, shoulders hunched with respect. Others came in pairs, notepads in hand, measuring wheels clacking as they traced every inch of Elijah's wooden maze like they meant to steal it one bolt at a time. The maze that had once been mocked as madness now stood as a monument to survival. But inside the cabin, tension settled like fresh snow. Maggie poured coffee at the kitchen table, the silence sharp between the clink of her spoon and the low murmurs from the group outside. "They didn't come to praise you, Eli," she said. "They came to take a piece of what you bled for." Elijah didn't look up from the window. "Let them. They'll build their own and say it was their idea. It won't matter if it saves the herds. But you paid the price. You sold everything for this. And now they want the blueprints for free." He turned then slow. "They think they want the maze. But what they really want is a shortcut. Something they can nail together and not think about twice. But the thing that saved our cattle wasn't just wood and shape. It was cost. Sacrifice. That's what made it hold." Maggie stared at him, her face tired. "Still, it burns." He nodded just once. "Still." Out the window, more wagons creaked down the trail. One held a Reporter City-type boots, two clean eyes, too sharp. He had a camera slung around his neck and a yellow notepad tucked beneath his coat. Another wagon brought two men from the County Stock Association. They spoke with the language of numbers, not names, loss, ratios, yield percentages, cost, recovery. Noah stood near the barn gate, arms folded tight. He didn't speak to any of them, just watched as they prodded the maze, measured its length, jotted notes, and speculated how many heads of cattle each corridor could support. Raymond walked up the path with a can of nails and a rusted hammer. "Half of them don't even know how to brace a corner joint," he muttered as he passed Elijah. "I saw one guy ask if you'd built the thing with glue." Maggie snorted. "That'll hold up great in a storm." Raymond tossed the can onto the porch, hard enough to rattle the boards. "If they're gonna take your idea, they better take the truth of it too. This thing wasn't built in a weekend. It came from fear, from selling the horses, from watching your son skip meals so you could buy more lumber. They need to hear that part." Elijah stepped down from the porch. "Then I'll tell them." Noah met him at the gate. "You gonna give a speech? I'm gonna give them what they think they want," Elijah said. "Then tell them what it'll really cost." He walked into the center of the maze where the paths converged. The cattle were quieter now, recovering, moving slower but steadier. Their breath still curled in the cold air, but their steps no longer dragged. Life had returned to them. The ranchers gathered when they saw Elijah step into the open. Conversations paused. Notebooks closed. All eyes turned. He stood tall, arms at his sides. Wind brushed through the maze like a memory. "I didn't build this to prove a point," he began. "I built it because I didn't know what else to do." The words landed hard in the cold. "I built it while selling everything I had, while neighbors laughed, while my boy went without. I built it not because I was sure it would work, but because I couldn't live with not trying." He paused, let his eyes meet the crowd. "Now you're here asking how it's done. You want the layout, the angles, the numbers. But none of that will save you when the wind screams and the sky disappears. What saves you is what you're willing to give up before the storm ever hits." A murmur ran through the group. "You want to build a maze, then you better build it out of more than wood. Build it out of sacrifice. Out of belief so strong you'll go to sleep hungry just to put up one more beam. Otherwise, you're wasting nails." He stepped back. "That's all I've got." Silence followed. The reporter scribbled something. The stockmen exchanged glances. Some folks looked ashamed. Others looked thoughtful. A few just walked away, muttering. June Carlson came forward. "You willing to help us draw plans?" Elijah gave her a small nod. "If you're willing to listen to more than measurements." Behind him, Noah turned away, not toward the cabin, but toward the pasture, where more of their herd had started to gather. Maggie followed him with her eyes. Later that night, with the fire low and the cabin quiet, Elijah sat alone at the table, notebook open again. This time not to count the dead, but to sketch a better version of the maze. One that could be rebuilt easier, stronger. Maggie sat across from him. "You really gonna give it to them?" He nodded. "If it means fewer frozen calves next year, yeah." She studied him for a long moment. "You look tired, Eli." "I am." Noah came in, face red from the wind. "They're still out there, building markers, measuring fence lines, copying." "Let them," Elijah said. "Winter will test what they build, same as it did me." Noah leaned against the doorframe. Storm changed the land, but it changed the people more. Elijah looked down at his hands, scarred, cracked, strong. "No," he said. "The storm showed us what we were already made of. And somewhere outside in the maze of wood and wind, the cattle breathed warm against the frost. Maybe the real maze wasn't out in that field. Maybe it was what we walked inside: grief, pride, memory, hope." Noah Blackhorse. The thaw came quiet. Not fast and not loud like the storm that carved through their valley, but in slow inches. Each morning, a little more ice peeled off the barn roof. Each afternoon, the sun lingered longer on the ridges, melting the corners of the drifts, until the land began to reveal itself again. The world hadn't healed, but it had started to breathe. Inside the maze, the cattle moved freer now. Their bodies had filled out again, hooves more sure on the half-mud, half-snow paths. Elijah watched them from the same porch where he had first measured each board, each angle, wondering if it would ever matter. Raymond came down from the loft with a coil of rope in one hand and his hat tipped back on his head. "Walked the maze this morning. No new damage. She held better than she had any right to." "She held," Elijah said quietly. "You ever think about taking it down?" Raymond asked. "No." "Good," Raymond said. "We got neighbors already asking to use it next freeze. They'll be bringing cattle through like a highway." Elijah managed a dry smile. "Long as they bring a shovel and know how to patch planks." Raymond chuckled and went off toward the shed. Elijah stayed. Noah approached not long after, boots thick with slush, hands in his coat pockets. His face had lost that hard edge of suspicion he'd carried during the build, but something else had taken its place: stillness. Like the storm had carved something out of him and left clean stone in its place. "Been thinking," he said. Elijah looked over. Noah stared out at the maze. Maybe the real maze wasn't out in that field. Maybe it was what we walked inside: grief, pride, memory, hope, all tangled up. Elijah was quiet for a while. "That what you found at the center?" Noah nodded. "That and something else. Something quieter." He knelt down at the edge of the porch and started unpacking a small box. Inside were pieces of driftwood, some polished, others still rough. Nails, wire, bits of rusted metal he'd gathered from the storm's aftermath. "I want to build something," he said. "Not a maze. Something small. A marker. For the ones we lost." Elijah stepped down and looked over the box. "You remember every one?" "Yeah," Noah said. "Every tag number, every calf. Even the one with the twisted leg we didn't think would make it through summer, but did." Elijah bent to pick up a curved sliver of wood. "You want help?" Noah smiled faintly. wouldn't turn it down. They worked together in the yard as the sky turned gold. Maggie came out later, brought water and bread, but didn't speak. Just sat and watched the two of them kneel side by side, shaping memory with their hands. By dusk, they had the marker standing upright at the eastern edge of the maze. A tall, narrow cross of driftwood bound in iron wire with a rusted bell from an old calf collar hanging beneath it. No names, no numbers, just the sound of the wind moving through metal when it passed. Maggie ran her fingers along the wood. Simple, she said, and true. That night they ate stew with cornbread and lit the fire earlier than usual. The cabin didn't feel crowded like it had during the storm. It felt full, lived in, the kind of quiet that only comes after a reckoning. Later, after Raymond had gone to bed, and Maggie was finishing a letter to her sister down in Wind River, Elijah took a small folded paper from his coat pocket. He handed it to Noah. "What's this?" Noah asked. "Land offer. Same one Virgil sent me last fall, before the storm." Noah opened it, read, looked up. "You didn't take it." Elijah shook his head. "Couldn't." Noah folded the paper again and held it between his fingers. "You still think about it some nights," Elijah admitted. "Would have meant giving up the herd, giving up everything we built. But less risk," Noah said. "Less pain, less of a fight," Elijah added. Noah leaned back in his chair. "You think we're better because we stayed. I think we're here. That counts for something." A log popped in the stove. Maggie folded her letter and tied the envelope shut. "We lose things," she said softly. "But not everything. Not if we keep building." Noah stood and looked out the frosted window. Beyond it, the maze lay still, silent in the dark. A skeleton of salvation built from stubbornness and loss. "You know," he said, "there's folks saying we were lucky." "Luck didn't carry lumber," Elijah said. "Luck didn't stand in the wind hammering boards when your fingers went numb." Noah turned back. "No. But maybe luck's what brought us to the edge of something and let us step through instead of fall in." The bell on the driftwood marker outside chimed once in the wind. Low, clear. The three of them looked toward the sound, then let the silence come in behind it. Maggie set her letter by the door. "I'll mail it in the morning." Raymond's snore broke through the floorboards above. Noah laughed quietly. "Storm or no storm, some things don't change." Elijah smiled too. But deep in his bones he knew things had changed. The land had spoken. The storm had tested more than his maze. It had tested what kind of men they were when the sky broke open. And they were still here, scarred, humbled, alive. "I didn't build the maze to save cattle. I built it to save myself from giving up, from forgetting, from leaving the land before it knew my name." Elijah Blackhorse. The ground was thawing. Patches of mud broke through the crusted white. Water trickled down from the ridgeline, forming quiet rivulets that cut through the pasture like veins. Spring had not yet fully arrived, but the land had begun to remember what warmth felt like. Elijah Blackhorse stood at the top of the maze, his hand resting on a support beam. The wood was weathered now, scuffed and split in places, but still standing. Beyond it, his cattle grazed slow and lazy, nuzzling at what grass dared to grow early. The herd moved differently now, calmer, tighter, as if memory lived in their muscles. They hadn't just survived the storm, they'd carried it. He heard the gate clatter behind him and turned to see Maggie approaching, a small bundle wrapped in canvas tucked beneath her arm. "Figured it was time," she said, holding it out. Elijah took it carefully. The fabric was soft with wear, the string tied in a firm knot. He sat on the edge of the walkway and unwrapped it. Inside were Sarah's beadworks, the ones he'd sold months ago to pay for the early lumber. The ones Maggie had bought back quietly, piece by piece, from the trading post in Lander. Elijah's throat tightened. He ran his thumb along the bead lines, the patterns his wife used to stitch, late at night by firelight, sometimes humming under her breath, sometimes not. "I thought they were gone," he said. Maggie sat beside him. "So did I. But some things wait for you." He looked at her. "You didn't have to." "I did," she cut in. "Because she didn't build those for trade. She built them for memory, for keeping the shape of a life in your hands when time tries to take it." He laid the beadwork in his lap and stared out across the land. "Sometimes I wonder," he said. "What if the storm hadn't come? What if I'd taken the deal, sold the land? Walked away clean, you'd be breathing easier," Maggie said, "but not fuller." He nodded slowly. They sat in the silence, the soft clink of cattle bells drifting on the wind. Later, Noah joined them with a ledger tucked under his arm. He sat on the other side of his father and opened the book. "I tallied feed costs, vet bills, fence repair," he said. "Also figured out how many heads we'll need to sell come fall to break even." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Break even, more or less, if we can lease grazing rights on the south plot for spring, and if the new calves come in strong." Elijah took the ledger and flipped through the pages. Neat columns, clean numbers, margin notes with estimates and variables. "This is good work," he said. "Real good." Noah didn't smile, just looked out at the field. "I've been thinking about staying." Elijah paused. "I mean for good," Noah said. "Not just through calving season. Not just until you catch your breath." Elijah studied his son's profile, older than it had a right to be carved from wind and responsibility. But there was steadiness there now. Weight, yes, but also roots. "This land doesn't make it easy," Elijah said. "I'm not asking it to," Noah replied. "I just want to build something I won't need to abandon every time the sky turns dark." Elijah set the ledger down and nodded. Maggie rose quietly and walked toward the barn. The two men sat side by side watching their herd graze. "You ever regret it?" Noah asked. "What, staying, fighting, losing so much just to hold a little?" Elijah was quiet for a long while. Then he said, "I didn't build the maze to save cattle. I built it to save myself from giving up, from forgetting, from leaving the land before it knew my name." Noah nodded slowly. "It knows now." That afternoon, June Carlson returned with a cart full of lumber and two young ranch hands. She wanted Elijah to walk them through the curves of the maze again, this time not just for study, but for action. She meant to build one of her own in her own way, suited to her own land. Later, Tomas Rodriguez sent a note. 3 of his surviving cattle had birthed early and strong. He credited the shelter the maze had provided during their gestation. Marcus brought nails. Others sent feed. One rancher down by Sage Hollow brought a generator, a gift for the man who outbuilt the wind. Elijah accepted what he could and deflected the rest. He wasn't looking for reward. The storm hadn't made him famous. It had made him honest. And it had given him back his family. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and spilled gold across the maze, Elijah sat alone beneath the driftwood marker. The calf bell swung gently in the breeze. A soft chime, almost a whisper. He touched the wire binding the beams together. "We're still here," he said. And in that moment, the land felt closer than ever, not just a place, but a companion. Rough and brutal at times, yes, but alive, listening. Maggie called from the cabin. Dinner was ready. He stood and walked back through the maize boards, creaking beneath his boots. The herd stirred slightly as he passed, some lifting their heads, some not. The maze had changed shape in his mind. No longer a wall against the storm. Now it was a passage, a memory, and a promise.